What are the theoretical limits of human strength? Modern lifting culture has been around for over a century, pushing the limits of human achievement through sports like bodybuilding, powerlifting, weightlifting, and strongman. Over time, these sports have perfected the methods used to find and develop the best talent on the planet, and world records have continued to climb as a result. Powerlifting is now the most universally recognized demonstration of strength. It was created in 1964, nearly 70 years after weightlifting was first featured in the 1896 Olympics. The sport of powerlifting used three basic barbell movements, the squat, bench, and deadlift, to test maximal strength of the whole body. The inaugural year was dominated by the late Dr. Terry Todd, who put up the biggest performance of the year with a three-lift total of 1,780 pounds. It was an impressive display even by today's standards, but each meet, more talent came and more records were set. The total jumped by hundreds of pounds every year, and the obvious question came, when does it stop? In 1975, a mere decade after the first official powerlifting meets, Don Reinhardt absolutely annihilated the record with an impossible 931-pound squat, 610-pound bench press, and 850-pound deadlift, resulting in a total of 2,391 pounds that stood in excess of 600 pounds above Terry Todd's numbers from a decade prior. That's an average of more than 200 pounds higher in each of the three lifts. Overflowing with men eager to push the limits, the sport of powerlifting progressed into an era of more equipment, more technology, and more absolute weight being moved. Although bigger numbers were set during this period, they were done with the use of highly specialized gear that could augment a person's ability to lift weight by hundreds of pounds. Strongmen came and went over the years, attracted to the idea of putting as many plates on the bar as possible, but their eagerness to exploit these new methods of lifting could be seen as an uneagerness to challenge the impossible record set in 1975. And because of that uneagerness, those three lifts, done with the minimal equipment of a belt and wraps, stood for almost 4 decades. Through the rest of the 20th century and into the 21st, one might guess that the question of where does it stop had been answered. That was until Andrei Malanichev came around in 2013, breaking the 38-year-old record and restarting the race to determine the strongest man of all time. Since then, Andre pushed the limit again to 2,500 pounds until Dan Bell took it to the current record of 2,606. And as each year brings bigger men who possess more talent and each one strives to find new ways to unlock superhuman strength, one just has to look at the rapid pace of technological advancement in other arenas and ask, when does it stop? Now, before you all rage in the comments, yes, pharmaceuticals are present at all levels of strength sports, but this is a video about human limits, which assumes you have perfectly calibrated equipment to train on, training protocols derived from scientific institutions, a diet full of calorically dense processed crap, and the leisure time only afforded by a modern lifestyle. And yes, in addition to that, a wide range of pharmaceuticals designed to push the limits of human ability. I can make a video about how strong Paleolithic man could have gotten catching his own food and wearing nothing but a loincloth, and the answer wouldn't really impress you. We're talking about pushing limits here, so we're going to do this no holds barred. So let's start off with the benchmarks of today. The best deadlift ever pulled was the 501 kilogram done by strongman legend Hafthor Bjornsson, with Eddie Hall just a kilo behind him. There's also a dozen men past the 1,000-pound mark, which is pretty exceptional considering 15 years ago that number was thought to be impossible. The best bench press done without any supportive equipment was done by Julius Maddox and stands at just a hair under 800 pounds. The best standing strict press is Iron Bibi with over 570 pounds, with Andrew Richards right behind him. And the best squat done without a squat suit is Vlad Alizov's impossibly heavy 1,150 pound squat. And there are about 24 men who are between 1,000 pounds and Vlad's record. All of these men are impossibly large, with massive elephant-like frames and an excess of body tissue, both muscle and fat. The average man on this list is around 400 pounds, with Thor being 6'9" and the rest being well over 6 foot. More mass and a bigger frame can hold more weight, which is really important when it comes to lifting maximal load, so remember that for later. On the smaller end of the weightlifting scale, we have some extreme outliers who get close to this strength at a much lighter body weight and with a much smaller frame. John Hack deadlifted 900 pounds to powerlifting standards, which are far stricter than strongman standards, and bench pressed 600 pounds all around 215 pounds body weight. So the biggest loads will always be moved by the biggest men, just like the biggest engines will always put out the most horsepower. But efficiency is lost, which means pound for pound strength, or strength efficiency if you will always bias towards lighter athletes. Now, here's an average male who's been in the gym a year, 5'9", 180 pounds, maybe a little chubby, probably can deadlift in the neighborhood of 300 pounds, probably can bench around 200-ish. Yes, we all know that you bench 415 after 2 months of lifting weights when you were 12 years old in high school and had a muscle wasting disease. Results certainly vary, and this is a crude average. So considering this average man, let's compare him to some of the best. The all-time record holders, 6'2" to 6'9", 400 pounds give or take, heavily marbled like a Christmas prime rib, and built to lift like an old forklift. If these men were all on a sports team together, their mascot would be Toe Mater. Now let's take this range of human achievement and compare it to some other benchmarks. For science, starting with Captain America. Good old Steve Rogers was a recipient of the Super Soldier Serum, making him the first official steroid user, God bless America. In the first Captain America movie, he was seen holding a motorcycle overhead with 3 women on it, weighing easily over 1,000 pounds. He lifted it effortlessly. Well, our strict press records are about half that, and the people putting them up, well, they don't quite look like Steve Rogers. One of the reasons that the biggest lifters tend to have high body fat percentages is that the most muscle will always be built in a caloric surplus. While there have been extremely strong bodybuilders who have very low body fat, very few people have the discipline to walk the tightrope of eating that allows long-term muscle growth while maintaining very low body fat. And even the ones who do have that discipline would theoretically still be bigger and stronger if they could take their foot off the brakes when it came to their food intake. Once in every 1,000 or so people, you will get the genetics of a Mariusz Pudzianowski who maintained extremely low body fat, eating whatever he wanted, including 5 pounds of ice cream every night. This goes to show that training and hormones only go so far. Rare genetic types are required to see the limits of human achievement. Alright, now let's move on from the comic book realm into real-life examples by comparing to our primate relatives. In 1964, a 163-pound chimp named Boma pulled 847 pounds on a dynamometer, where a similarly sized man could only pull about 210. That was used to extrapolate an estimated ability of around 2,000 pounds for an average gorilla. These extrapolations lead to really broad statements like gorillas have the strength of 4 to 7 men, which sounds scientifically precise and not ballparked at all. However, given that gorillas weigh 400 pounds and can jump higher than most athletes and swing like trained gymnasts, where our 400-pound powerlifters and strongmen absolutely cannot, we can say that they're pretty damn strong, stronger than human beings have the capacity to be. So when you look throughout nature, it's obvious that humans are not physically exceptional. We perish easily due to exposure because who needs fur when you have turtlenecks and skinny jeans? We can't run that fast. Our best is Usain Bolt, who tops out at around 23 miles per hour, compared to a regular-ass cheetah who can get up to around 80 miles per hour. And instead of claws that might fend off predators or replace a multi-tool, we have these useless fingernails that just crack and bleed. I mean, even my 14-pound lapdog Bella has claws that can draw blood. I have to be careful when peeling the sealant off a protein jug. But all is not lost. We have brains that have given us a bunch of cool shit, and we have a high endurance capacity that makes us better at marathon type events than our more powerful animal friends. But who cares about running far, doing math? I want to lift a motorcycle with chicks in it. Okay, needy. Let's take a look and see what's holding you back from that Steve Rogers level of performance. Are you looking for access to exclusive programs from the best minds in the field and some of your favorite YouTube influencers? Then look no further than Boostcamp. Boostcamp is a long-term sponsor of this channel, and I wouldn't be partnered with them if they didn't provide a great product. If you want optimal performance, you cannot just wing your weight selection. You have to make deliberate steps forward, so you need a program and you need a way to track progress on it. They make it easy to track your workouts from the convenience of your phone, so you never have to rely on your sloppy handwriting or your bad memory. And they give you access to a library of exclusive programs from some of the most well-known names in the business. Eric Helms, Bryce Lewis, Jeff Schofield, Bald Omni-Man, and yours truly. We all have programs up there that can only be found on the app, and it is absolutely free. My programs, Bull Mastiff and 70s Powerlifter, are both up there, and you can also check out Full Sturker, which tells you how to get strongman jacked using the things you find in a corporate gym. So special thank you to Boost Camp for making this channel possible. Unburden yourself from the hard business of making the perfect program from scratch. We've got them pre-made for you. Download their app right now by clicking the link in the description. Strength depends on a few basic features of our biology: our muscles, the frame that support those muscles, and the electrical signals that our brain sends to use those muscles. So let's start with our frame. You cannot lift weights unless your bones and the connective tissue that holds your muscles to them can actually support it. Now, this isn't a problem for the average Joe going to the gym for the first time, but there is an upper limit to how much your bones can support, and that becomes an issue when pushing the limits of human achievement. Scott Mendelson was one of the first people to break the 1,000-pound bench barrier when people were starting to get really good at using advanced supportive equipment. And his response to handling that type of weight was that he could feel his bones in his forearms flexing. Now, bone breaks typically aren't common unless you get into a wonky position, but they aren't unheard of. Tendon ruptures, on the other hand, are extremely common, as those attachment points take much longer to strengthen and can be outpaced by rapid muscle growth. I myself lost my bicep doing a tire flip, which is a sort of strongman rite of passage. When considering the most amount of weight a human being can theoretically lift, muscle strength doesn't matter if you can't keep the muscles fast into the bone. Thankfully, this is a byproduct, usually, of reckless training and rampant PED use that makes the connective tissue less vulnerable. Fear of your joints exploding is not a viable reason to sandbag it in the gym. There have been some insanely heavy displays of strength through very limited range of motions that show that at the very least, the human frame can support quite a bit of weight without breaking in half. Greg Ernst did this old-timey backlift performance with 5,340 pounds. Strongman Mike Jenkins and Nick Best did this hip lift with over 2,500 pounds, and the record for a hand-thigh lift is 1,900 pounds. So human beings with enough time to train can develop a frame and joints and connective tissue that can support insane amounts of weights. However, even the strongest human, if they could muster the force of an average gorilla, would probably end up suffering devastating injury from the lack of stability from their frame. Now, the other role your frame has is in determining how much muscle you can actually hold. A bigger chassis is going to support a bigger engine, period. So while efficiency might drop as you work with more and more material, total output is always going to go up. This is why the biggest weights lifted are always going to be from the men who are more rhinoceros than human, unless something like leverage makes up the difference. Your skeleton can be thought of as a series of levers and fulcrums, just like the trebuchet that you built in high school. How much force you can put out per unit of effort is going to largely be determined by your anthropometry, which is a fancy word for how long or short your limbs are in relation to each other and your height. Some lifts, like a deadlift, benefit from having a short torso because it's easier to lever up a shorter stick than a longer one. Deadlifting also benefits from really long arms, where benching benefits from short arms. We can even go really deep and look at how deep the tendons actually insert into the bone that they're moving, as attachments that go way down the limb can move more weight than shallow ones per unit of effort. Same person, same muscularity, but greater potential for weight move. So if we're talking about the potential of human strength, considering how big the frame is, how durable it is, and the proportions of it are all going to be crucial factors. Gorillas have much denser bones than humans do, even if the proportions aren't obviously different, which means that they are outfitted to withstand more force. And the ribcage and hips are much wider, which again can sustain greater forces while simultaneously holding more muscle mass. Now, once you have the frame set, we need something to move it, so our body spins out this stuff we call muscle tissue. Now, this stuff is really neat as it occupies every corner of our body and allows movement by contracting to pull joints closer together. This results in everything from playing a piano and jumping 6 feet in the air to breakdancing and powerlifting. Muscle is extremely trainable, meaning you could shed it and grow it pretty fast. They heal within a few days after a hard workout, and as new lifters can attest, visible growth can happen within months or even weeks. Now, one of the obvious factors in the limits of human strength is how much of it you can potentially have. This is extremely important for considering how strong we can potentially get but it's also the thing that we actually have the most control over. You can't do much with your frame except make it denser, and the nervous system stuff that we're going to talk about next has its own limitations, but calories plus training equals more muscle, which means a sufficiently motivated couch potato can quadruple his strength with mediocre genetics just by adding more size to his frame over time. A question that often comes up from the teenage powerlifting crew, the guys who started out 160 pounds and damn it are going to stay 160 pounds, is how they get elite levels of strength without gaining pounds of that ugly, clunky, unwanted muscle tissue. This is a very real problem because there is a limit to how much force any given cross-sectional area of muscle can actually generate. We start far away from that limit when we are untrained and we get closer over time. But if you've maxed out your ability to use the muscle that you have available, more training isn't going to do anything. Gaining more tissue has to be part of the equation. Now, muscle fibers exist in a spectrum of fast and slow twitch, where fast twitch fibers are really big and powerful, but they burn out really fast, and slow twitch fibers aren't very strong at all, but they can go forever. More powerful species and humans exist higher fast twitch fiber content, and that's a feature of the greatest athletes and strongmen that we see. It's been shown that your ratio of fast and slow twitch fibers can actually change a bit as you train to one specific goal over time, but someone born with a minority of fast twitch fibers isn't going to be able to develop the innate musculature of a cheetah or an NBA player, no matter the amount of diet, training, surgery, or hormones that come into the picture. Genetics give us a lot of room to change and grow based on what we do in our lives, and 100% of people are better off training than not training. But where the limits do exist, where the lines separate pretty muscular from here's an IFBB Pro card, those limits are hard and fast and they are not going anywhere. Now, the last component we can talk about is the nervous system, which constitutes the brain and all of the nerves that send signals from the brain to the muscles. The cool thing about the human body is that we can improve performance just by increasing that signal. So when I said you can't get stronger without gaining muscle if you've tapped out your ability to use that muscle, well, all of us start out way back from that point because our nervous system is inherently inefficient. Our bodies, in their infinite wisdom, limit from the start our ability to use all of the muscle we have available because, to the untrained couch potato, that would be a type of self-destruct mode. A maximal exertion out of nowhere would shred muscle tissue, detach ligaments, and exhaust energy supplies needed to keep your heart beating. Much of training is earning the right to take the governor off by making sure that the tendons are strong enough that we are capable of handling the load that we are moving. Now, aggression plays a big role here because getting amped can liberate more muscle tissue for immediate use and instantaneously make you stronger. Approaching the bar, you howl and clap your hands together, releasing a thundercloud of chalk. You aren't being clean, you aren't being quiet, and everyone is watching. This can be related to hormones, the ones you make naturally and the ones you buy from Mexico. It can also happen when you induce an intense psychological state, by watching Goku do a 3-minute long power-up or by huffing ammonia caps until you can't see straight. Our stronger animal friends are going to have a nervous system that is more innately wired to produce more force from the start because they are outfitted with all of the things that can tolerate that force production. Simply put, they don't have the same governor that restricts strength because they don't need one. And their continued survival mandates that they use all the strength and power that they have available. The ones born without the frames that can sustain the force or without the muscularity and nervous system that can generate it are the ones who aren't going to survive long enough to reproduce themselves. Now, on the topic of hidden sources of strength that can immediately improve your performance, there is a cultural myth that persists that human beings are actually capable of superhuman feats. If only we could just focus hard enough or come across a dire enough circumstance. The most common myth is the mom lifting the car off of her child, which I've been hearing over and over since I was a kid, and it sounds more stupid now than it did back then. First of all, lifting a car is a parlor trick. I know because we do it in strongman because it's a parlor trick. Sometimes they have you pick them up and carry them, sometimes they have you flip them, sometimes they have you deadlift one side of it. The reason they do this is because cars look more impressive because the total weight is very heavy. But just like with flipping 1,000-pound tires, we like telling people we do it because it has the word 1,000 pounds in it. but it doesn't require actually physically moving 1,000 pounds. So this whole myth goes back to Angela Cavallo, who was a mom in her late 50s who came out to find her son unconscious after the 1964 Impala he was working on slipped off the jack. She apparently summoned all of her motherly might in order to lift the car and free him. Oh my God, what a miracle! Except she didn't free him. A neighborhood kid and 2 others came out and reinserted the jack and helped him out. She just estimated that in the process, she lifted the car around 4 inches. Now, the amount of force needed to lift an Impala 4 inches, assuming it moved 4 inches, which it definitely didn't. It's not the 3,295 pounds of curb weight, it's not 2,000 pounds, it's not 1,000 pounds. It was probably 100 pounds of force. As the suspension gives a bunch of assistance and you don't have to get the tires off the ground to make the actual car move several inches, it was probably a few hundred pounds of force, and it probably felt like 1,000,000 pounds by the late 50s mother who was hysterical and thought that her son was currently dying. Now, if there is a story of someone lifting a car, it's because the positioning of the car allowed it to be moved by exerting a very human amount of force, not because they momentarily unlocked some hidden superhuman ability in a crisis. That type of belief leads to ridiculous shit, like this kid who thought that his family and community's belief in him would grant him the ability to set a new bench record and press over 700 pounds. Let's forget about the fact that that doesn't add up to 700 pounds. This isn't just stupid, it's highly dangerous, and the kid's lucky he walked away with any of his limbs still attached. Now, to be clear, this lack of ability is a very good thing, because if you could will yourself, after decades of being sedentary, to lift the several thousand pounds required to levitate a 1964 Impala off the ground, you would undoubtedly shred all of your muscles into hamburger and lose all of your tendon insertion points. The bruising and bleeding would probably kill you. So the more you know. Now, so much content around strength is focused on training because that's the one dial we have to turn when it comes to making ourselves stronger. You can not train at all and stay very weak, or you can do something that looks like training and get kind of strong. Or you can do some type of really good black belt, expert, advanced scientific programming and theoretically get as good as possible. Now, this line of thinking leads people to believe that if we continue to make advancements in training, people will continue to get stronger. And not to be a pessimist, but I just don't think that's going to be the case anytime soon. First of all, the field of exercise science is limited not just by funding, but by the amount of people willing to participate in studies. We're pretty much limited to the lower end of the totem pole of genetic talent for research because the advanced powerlifters and advanced bodybuilders and the professional Olympic weightlifters aren't going to give up their valuable blocks of training leading into world championships to be in the control group of a study about whether or not training to failure makes you marginally better than not. So data is pretty flimsy there. The rest of the data is fundamentally limited on the types of questions that can even be asked. Like any one variable that you might try to control for can theoretically put into a program a million different ways. And all of those different variables together give so many different approaches to training that you just can't control for in a single study. So any one bit of research isn't going to tell you a whole lot. Now, the big limitation that we're up against is controlling for genetic variation in the population, which we can't even kind of begin to touch on. So we have to put everybody together in a group and hope that all that variation just comes out in the wash. Of all the biological traits that we just covered, they all vary wildly from person to person. So individual tolerance to things like training, frequency, volume, effort, intensity are also going to be wildly different. So instead of taking findings from a study and being able to say, hey, you, based on your genetics, I know how you should train at every stage of your lifting, we are instead left saying, well, given a random group of people, we can guess that this might work marginally better than if this other group of people did something slightly different. So I strongly wouldn't recommend anybody bank on science bridging this gap in knowledge anytime soon. Also, all of the experimentation over the available talent pool has shown that there are many methods of programming that tend to work. Olympic lifting gets people super strong one way, while powerlifting gets people super strong another way, and bodybuilders even get pretty strong considering they don't prioritize strength. In addition to that, within each one of these groups, there are also a million variations of training, and people develop their own dogma around it. Some of that might be that people just are wired to grow from a lot of different stimuli, Another component might be that the genetic variations make a big difference in what works for you, and people over time find things that work better than others, and one size doesn't fit all. The most important thing is that you have somebody who is sufficiently talented, who does enough trial and error to find out what works for them, and then does that long enough to actually get good. And the way science is going, it's probably not going to be able to improve on this process very much. It's going to be an individual process that is not efficient and isn't going to lead to the best theoretical results in most cases. So let's talk about what a theoretical superhuman might look like. Given that training advancements probably aren't going to move the bar, let's look at what will. Genetic predisposition is far and away the most important thing here, and no amount of training or drugs will make up for it. As much as people focus on testosterone and other steroids as a determinant, even hormone use isn't enough to make up the gap genetics create. Consider the difference between male and female lifters. PED use is rampant in female strength athletes, elevating their testosterone levels to many times higher than a typical male would have. However, the unbridled use of PEDs doesn't result in matching men on records, even when you control for weight class. The most weight deadlifted by any man is the 501 kilogram deadlift by Hafthor Bjornsson. The most weight deadlifted by any woman on the planet at any size or weight is right around 700 pounds, pulled by Tamara Walcott. Even if you control for somebody who is Tamara's size, you still get 900 pound and 1,000 pound deadlifts pretty routinely at the top levels. Now, it's been claimed that socialization plays a factor, like more men lift and they start lifting sooner because boys are told to do boy things, like lift, but records exist outside of the West, and I assure you that when Russia, China, and North Korea are scouring their citizens for the best female talent, putting them in training camps at the age of 9, and including them in their state-sponsored PED programs, they do not care about Western ideals of what a proper lady is. The fact of the Y chromosome makes a massive gap beyond what testosterone by itself can do. That is, the things required to potentiate maximal performance are complex and multivariate. So for any human to match what, say, a gorilla could do or beyond is going to require selecting for extremely rare combinations of genetic coding or outright altering it altogether. The strongest possible human is going to have an exceptionally large frame with limb proportions and tendon insertions best suited for moving big objects. In addition, they're going to be an outlier in their representation of fast switch fibers and in the way that their nervous system expresses itself. Think of it this way: you need the innate efficiency of the strongest people pound for pound, but in the body of a giant. So take all of the people with Hafthor Bjornsson's frame and sift through them until you find somebody with the genetic gifts of a John Hack. Given how many people have John Hack's average size frame and the fact that we've only found one John Hack, think of the likelihood of finding something similar in a man who is 6'9", given how few people are 6'9". The reality is that this person probably hasn't been born yet, and if they have, they didn't find their way to lifting. I believe we are close to the upper limit of human achievement if the population doesn't really change. But one of the most viable ways to jack these numbers up in the short term is if our population starts turning out more of these people so we have a bigger talent pool to choose from. If participation in these sports increases dramatically, or if the population just starts turning out more 7-footers, we may get a large enough talent pool to see a big pump in these numbers that just yesterday were thought to be impossible. Take Jamal Browner, who deadlifts 960 pounds at under 275 pounds body weight. What would he be capable of if he committed to gaining the mass held by his peers? Or if you applied his specific genetic gifts to somebody a foot taller? I can already imagine many of the records that exist now increasing by 5 to 10% simply by selecting better talent. And the increase in popularity of niche sports like strongman over the last 15 years might be the thing that brings in more people. I can imagine 900-pound raw bench presses and 1,200-pound deadlifts simply by finding numerous Dan Bells, numerous Eddie Halls, and numerous Hafthor Bjornssons and putting them together with more carefully monitored training programs and the competitive drive to outdo each other and to set the next impossible lift. But going beyond that will require advancements in technology. Eventually, we will have to figure out how to make bones denser and broader to support bigger loads and to provide better leverage. Molecular changes to the muscle and connective tissue might have to be made to keep it from ripping apart, or they might have to be swapped out for other materials altogether. Gene editing from projects like CRISPR might be the future here, where we can analyze genotypes and pre-package certain combinations of genetic material that optimize for one highly specialized type of performance, almost like a character build in a video game. The ethical questions are a concern for another video. All I know is advancements in the near future will give people the option to bring the avatars from Ready Player One into real life, where body modifications can be taken to the extreme and genetic manipulation can lead to questions as to what it even means to be human. Like, imagine the money in spiking the genetics of a human embryo with the wide hips and dense bones of Donkey Kong to serve as a lineman in the NFL. Looking at human achievement from this altitude, the limits of human strength become little more than an engineering problem. It's like asking what materials and blueprints are required to get a bridge to hold hundreds of tons. Once you have the math and the technology, it's just a matter of putting it together. 2,500 pound squats? Sure, why not? 1,600 pound overhead presses? I can see it. And at that point, when lifting culture looks back on us and our pathetic attempts to get stronger using flimsy studies and a whole lot of hormones, they're gonna look at us the way that an architect looks at a beaver trying to build a dam. Even if society doesn't go the radical gene editing route, where we're all really strong and live really long, but look like something from The Hills Have Eyes, technology will surely make up the gap. No doubt that eventually the crude exoskeletons that promise to help paraplegics walk and allow warehouse workers to be more efficient will eventually become commonplace. It'll be more compact, more accessible. And when the average person has an upgrade that makes 1,000-pound lifts run of the mill, I wonder what will be left of strength sports. So that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if this sparked any questions. Where do you think we're going? Do you think strength sports are going to get more ridiculous and capitalize on technology? Or do you think that they're going to fade away as the average person has the ability to modify their body in such disparate and extreme ways? Let me know what you think in the comments. Better yet, take it to Patreon. That's where I upload my training weekly. And that is the easiest way to get in contact with me. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.